You definitely can convert from the overconsumption condition, let's call it B followed by E followed by E or bed, to the reductive form, let's call it Rex. Okay. And you can have the atypical Rex diagnosed and it not really be accurate either. I personally think that most cases, not just Tess is a very obvious case of a misdiagnosis and not even a real diagnosis when you look into her story. She wasn't actually formally diagnosed at all. That's not what really happened. But either way, some people are being diagnosed when they have never even lost a dramatic amount of weight, and even when they have lost a dramatic amount of weight, they've never been losing weight while underweight. And I think that is an important distinction. There's a different mentality when you are currently underweight and you still keep losing. I think you've switched to something else, as opposed to just focusing on, I don't want to be overweight and I really, really want to be not overweight anymore. I do think that's part of bed when you go too harsh and you can harm yourself in the way that you lose the weight. That is still part of an E followed by a letter D. However, I don't think it's helpful to diagnose it as this atypical Rex. I think it's something else. And I'm going to link to a video of a person who's had bed and is recovered and talks about his explanation of why. I do agree with his points. It's a long video, but I've linked it to a specific timestamp where he starts talking about that, and then I'd watch the rest of it at least if you're just interested in that concept of why it's being so rampantly, in my opinion as well, misdiagnosed, bed as atypical Rex. And the idea being, yeah, it's different physiologically when you're losing weight from underweight, and not that you can't harm yourself, but it's different type of harm. It's not really starvation. Your body isn't eating its own organs, anything like that. If it were, I presumably it wouldn't feel the same either. It could feel rough at both ends, but it's not the same. And he does explain why you always bounce back up or you recover. If you're on the reductive phase of bed, you just bounce back up again, or you fluctuate. And not everyone even does the reductive phase when they have bed. I mean, Sam at Every Size says that she doesn't at all, and she's also got bed. So I want to show you an example of what it looks like in the very rare cases, extremely rare. I've looked for other cases, but in the media, and I racked my brain. I've been looking into mental health problems, including EDS, since I was very young. I had a special interest very young, and no, this is the only one I can think of. But I do want to show that it can happen because I don't want to dismiss this idea that it can be a risk and you should watch out for it. If you're worried and if you're watching this sort of channel, maybe you are worried. And I want to show you what the mentality is like. This man who went from bed to Rex, he actually talks like someone with Rex. And I know I've watched enough documentaries and seen enough people. I know how they talk about things, and it is just, and there's a lot of overlap, a ton of overlap between that and bed, but there are certain things that are unique to each. There are certain things you don't hear bed people say, and he is now saying them.
Food just frightens me now.
Okay, some people who have clearly got still bed and say that they have the other one, they will say that, but their behaviour kind of demonstrates it's not. I think they have a love-hate relationship is what they're normally trying to say. They love food and they hate it, but the love part overrides it, and that's just not how people with Rex are.
I go for days without eating at all.
Simon bakes every day, but gives everything he makes to friends, family, and homeless charities.
That is so common in Rex. Okay, that is incredibly common. And there are a couple of theories on what's causing that, and the most obvious one people think of, but I don't think is actually usually the case when you're not even recovering yet, right? Is people say it's because you're trying to make everyone else bigger, so you feel. But I actually don't think. I do think that is a thing that some people with Rex do, especially as they are recovering, and they realize they have to gain weight, and the ones who go into therapy, I think, are doing that. Some of them, a lot of the thin fat acceptance people are doing that, but I actually think that the baking and making food for other people and not eating it yourself, I think there are other explanations for why that happens, and it's really common in Rex. Like, they get obsessed with food and making loads of it, elaborate 4-course dinners, and they won't eat any of it. And they will often try and give it to other people. And one reason, this is one I've come up with, this isn't one I've read from academic sources, is that it's a way of satisfying that the primitive lizard part of your brain is making you obsess over thinking about eating, thinking about all kinds of food. That's not the ed. That is your instinct from your lizard brain doing that, and that it's a way of quieting that. Like, so you're around it, you can sort of trick your brain in a way. Look, I'm smelling it, I'm seeing it. There's all this food, and it's kind of satisfying it. And then vicariously watching someone else eat can kind of, you can vicariously imagine eating, but not actually have to do it. That's what I think is, and it's kind of related based on what I've heard them say about it, and it's not exactly how they word it, but I think that's kind of the underlying mechanism, and also an evolutionary thing of a famine response where we become, a lot of us have this instinctive altruistic response to starving, where our brains act as if we're in a famine, and in a famine, humans would have to not eat each other. We would have to not turn on each other and like fight over food or even eat each other, right? To survive as a tribe, for the tribe to survive famines, which would have happened a lot in our ancestral past, we would have to have a gene that would kick in whenever we're starving that makes us want to be altruistic and give food to others. And I think that is part of that weird instinct of, I'm starving and I have this weird feeling, I feel really good when I give food to other people. But I can't eat any of it myself. And it's like activation of that instinct in a obviously irrelevant situation. You're not actually in a famine, but the lizard brain doesn't know or care. It's still going to do what it does.
I get some kind of strange satisfaction out of seeing people enjoy the things that I don't feel able to enjoy myself.
Yeah.
Simon's been
exactly
anorexic.
kind of what I'm saying, right? I'm just going to skip ahead to get away from that word in case YouTube doesn't like it. It says basically he's had this condition for 2 years now.
Otherwise, at the end of the day, this will kill me, and it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. Because every time I try and eat, I can't. I've always had an unhealthy relationship with food, so I was really quite big, probably around 23, 24 stone. I had a heart attack. I guess it had a deep psychological effect.
So there's a trauma there that's like, the YouTuber below, Graphically Alex, I'm going to link to, he will say like the conditions are activated by trauma in genetically vulnerable people, and people with certain personality traits will react to trauma perhaps in this way. Something to control, whether it's how controlling that you eat a lot of certain types of food, or controlling that you don't, right? Or controlling that you eat a lot and then find ways to not gain weight. Sort of, yeah, and I won't go into that anymore. But basically, it sounds like he was then traumatized after already having a very traumatic event, a heart attack, right? And then I can understand how that might, a second trauma that's that severe, and it is directly related to your existing eating problem. I can absolutely see how in that sort of situation, your brain could do like this thing where it's like, I still want to use my obsession with how I look, and usually with bed it's the other way around, where you obsess over not liking how you look as a distraction from whatever else is on your mind. You obsess over the idea of being a fat person in a society and stuff, and you obsess over how much you want to eat your chosen foods and the ritual around it, right? And I can see how this terrifying experience would make you think, well, I can't do that anymore. I'm going to keep having heart attacks basically until I pass away. And yet I still want to use my coping mechanism. And I guess like switching to another one, I can see how you could switch to another one to keep your obsession alive. You just have to adjust it. And in his mind, that's going to like prevent a heart attack. But obviously it won't. You can also have a heart problem when you're underweight, right? And depending on how severe it gets. And the thing with having lost a lot of weight, I imagine he's likely got at least some loose skin. It varies between people, but that might also make him not realize how thin he is. And then because it can look, especially when it's not that severe, it can just look like a layer of fat. It doesn't even necessarily look obviously like loose skin from most angles. So I can see how that would happen, and then before you know it, you've got a new obsessive thing. And so even though it started possibly as, I just don't want to have a heart attack, it then could turn into a new, oh, this is now how I deal with all those things I was always trying not to think about. And now I'm trapped in that cycle instead. I can absolutely understand how that could happen, but still be very rare, because as I said, an0rex itself is very rare, so it's going to be more common to transfer the other way, and it's going to be more common to transfer from AN to BN is super common, BN to AN is somewhat common, but because AN, the rex, that's much less common than the other two. Therefore, it is not going to happen that often compared to converting the other way.
I'll do everything that I can to reverse the effect of whatever I've eaten.
He's talking about walking. I think I skipped past a bit, but and that is super common in AN. They walk. Not everyone, but I've really noticed that people with AN, they will walk many miles, but not necessarily other forms of exercise. Most of them don't do other forms of exercise, like they don't do intense cardio, intense lifting, anything. Some of the men doing lifting because they're trying to get muscular and don't really like wherever they're trying to get muscular but doing the opposite, but a lot of them, including most of the men, do just mostly walking, and I think that's probably because they don't have the energy or they think, I would imagine it's because if they try to do other forms of exercise, a lot of other forms of exercise, you could pass out easily, much more easily than just walking. Like, at least if you're walking, you're going to get a warning that you're about to pass out, and you just, you have the strength to walk more than you have the strength for other forms of exercise. I think that's probably the reason. And it's just walking is, and also there's a theory that, again, it's an evolutionary thing. When we were in famines, we would have to often migrate. We wouldn't just wait them out. We would move and try to get to a area where there was more food. We would try to move away from the area of, say, a drought or whatever had caused the famine, and we would migrate. So that some people think that there is an primitive instinct kicking in that's making these people want to walk really many miles. And it's so interesting, you don't see that with bed. I've never seen anyone talk about obsessively walking, not even with BN, not even with the one where you eat a lot and then get rid of it. They do exercise, but those people usually do other types of exercise. They don't just walk they don't walk for like hours every day. They do other more intense kind of exercise. So again, the different types of ED, they do have certain things that are quite distinctive to those conditions. It's not just, yes, there is a lot of overlap, there's a lot of things they will have in common, but it's not like we could just, I don't think it's that we should just be, willy-nilly throwing out one diagnosis or the other because they're all kind of the same. No, they're not. There are important differences that could affect treatment, could affect what treatment they should have, and can affect your ability to get through to a person. If you're talking to them as if they're thinking one way when that's not quite how they're thinking, surely it's going to be harder to make breakthroughs in talk therapy, for example.
I tend to walk as far as my body will allow me to walk.
The number of male patients being treated for eating
We'll skip ahead to that word.
years, it's more than double the rise seen in female patients. The number of boys being treated has gone up by 1/3 in the last year alone.
So they don't break down which conditions, though. I really wish they did, because it could be ARFID. ARFID is now in the DSM under the same category, but ARFID is so different. ARFID has nothing to do with body image. It has nothing to do with coping with trauma. It's actually an assortment of mostly unrelated conditions that they've called ARFID, and there are different subtypes. One of them is not having the appetite, which is most of the people on super size versus super skinny basically were in that category, had no appetite, and on top of that were lazy and literally too lazy to make themselves put food in mouth and chew. Like, honestly, watch it. Like, most of them were in that category, and a few others had other types of ARFID, like fear of choking and not wanting to eat in case they choke, not wanting to eat because of a phobia of vomit. Like emetophobia is a common. Well, it's one of the forms of ARFID. I don't know how common. I know someone with it, and they can become underweight too. And so they don't say, is it ARFID? Because ARFID is much more commonly diagnosed now because it was only put in the DSM-5. It wasn't even in there in previous, before DSM-5, which I think is 2007, maybe later. I might be off, but it's like, so ARFID is, and it's getting more widely known about, and it's more commonly diagnosed in adults and not just children lately. So I think that's I really would like to know a breakdown of which EDs, which erectile dysfunctions are more common.
Despite the increase, the total number of male patients treated last year, around 1,200, still represents only 8% of the total. And these figures don't necessarily mean that more men have eating disorders.
This is important. This is important to point out.
The stigma is lifting.
Yeah, that's also the thing. Are there actually more people with any of the conditions or is it that some of them are being diagnosed, like getting caught earlier before they get severe, or in the case of our food, getting caught at all? Some of those people would just live their whole lives just very unhealthy in the past.
Or are seeking help.
Boys and
Yeah, I
men
do think more probably seeking help.
are realizing that this is an illness and this is not a choice.
Dr. Kieran Shitale is based at the Julian Hospital in Norwich and treats under 18s with
Boys, we might see a lot of obsession around shape.
Sometimes, not
bulking
always.
yourself and muscle mass and what.
Yeah, it is important to point out that like sometimes they talk about male E followed by letter D as if it's always in all men about bulking, but that's no, and historically that's not the case. A lot of men, especially depending on subculture, which is fascinating, like a lot of goth and indie rock guys do want to look just the same as like how the goth and indie rock girls want to look. Like they're using inspirational pictures online. Let's say I can't use the official word for it, but they use those pictures looking at really thin goth guys because they're not looking at big beefy guys because the kinds of clothes that they like to wear in their music subculture, you don't see this in metal because metal guys and girls are not like all really thin, right? But because their clothes that they wear in that, if you listen to a lot of metal music, you tend to wear clothes that don't necessarily flatter most of the very thin body. But if you wear a lot of goth clothes or indie rock style clothes, or emo, so because you're listening to those kinds of music, you do tend to look better, like the clothes, the skinny jeans, the eyeliner. It looks better on a guy with a thin face. It looks better on a guy with thin legs, to wear those kinds of clothes. So I have noticed that a lot of men in those subcultures don't want to look big and bulky. They want to look like kind of like Not no, that's exaggeration, but they do want to look like a Tim Burton character, like tall and thin. And they can't make themselves tall, but they can make themselves thin. And it is, I have actually seen, there's even a study on why E followed by letter D is more common in goths, but I think they clearly just mean the reductive one. But even the BING one, now I think about it, a lot of goths, from what I've seen, compared to like the baseline of the population you're in, you go into a goth club, not that they're that easy to find, a true one, but a lot of people are either like a line or a circle. Like more so than in the jump up. Obviously, there are people in the middle, but like the distribution is different. There's more people on one extreme on the other. Anyway, that's a huge rant off topic. A little, not really off topic, but yeah, that's all I wanted to point out there is that it's not all men wanting to be buff. That can be a thing, and it can cause over and under calorie consumption over time. A lot of guys who try to get really buff end up with this problem where they're very underweight, which is really odd, but I mean it's happened a lot. I think I don't know what I'd have to like talk to one of them and say like, so how did that happen? How did you try to get buff but not know that you were getting really? But I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen and lead to end of life, like very early end of life. In one case, might cover that video at some point. But I really want to focus more on bed on this channel. But you can't ignore the other one, even though it's like much rarer and yet more covered because the fat acceptance movement won't let us. Like they keep bringing it up, so we have to. And I also think for other reasons, it's worth always trying to talk about all of them to some degree, even if you have a focus on one. I do think there's value in you can't just ignore the others because you can convert from one to the other, and because there's so much talk and confusion about what is one and what's the other. You do have to, I think, address all of them. I try to do that a lot. I don't want to get just only focused on one, partly because it gives the wrong impression. I think if you're only talking about overweight people, it can give, especially when you're not overweight yourself, it can give give viewers the impression perhaps that, oh, this is just someone obsessed with fat. It's not that. I'm interested in all of them. I just think bed has been a neglected one, and it's one that I didn't know about until more recently. So I want to learn more about it as well.
What does it mean to be a man? As a society, we are being fed a daily diet of controversy around what constitutes good food and bad food.
So she's on. I'm not saying she's in fat acceptance or health at every size. That's not enough to go on, right? But it is going towards that view of things, which I do think isn't helpful. Where they try and say society is why people is like certain social trends are contributing to it. I don't think they do. I really don't see that. Graphically, Alex talks about that. I think I'm sure other people indirectly talk about the real reasons. It's trauma. It's personality traits coming together. It's certain genetic traits that mean you can physically tolerate doing certain things to yourself. Certainly with AN, there's evidence that some of the genes for that are basically genes that enable you to not suffer that much when you're under eating. Like subjectively, you don't feel as bad as someone else would. There's some evidence that like it's something to do with like they've got certain genes in how their body responds to famine that means like they release a lot of opioids, so they actually can feel, some of them certainly report that it gives them a high, and yet other, that's not, most people who are in a famine don't experience a high, but some people with AN do, which suggests there could be. And the same with, I think, on the other end, some people I think have genetic predispositions which mean they are protected against some of the worst like complications, and therefore they don't feel that bad. Like they have probably health problems building up, but they're more silent, they don't experience them. This is my theory on why some people, if they, like Brendan Fraser, I was just reading a comment by someone saying Brendan Fraser tried to gain 300 pounds to play the character in The Whale, couldn't do it. And I was thinking, even though he has been somewhat overweight in the past, I do think that some people will try and the side effects are so bad that they can't make themselves do it, and other people don't get such bad side effects. I think obviously he's an older man, that's makes it a lot harder than being a young woman. And women tend to tolerate fat better because of hormonal reasons, don't have the complications as quickly. So yeah, I do think there's none of it's to do with society though. If it was, why is it that like the rate of the reductive one has not actually, when you look into really good research that uh, accounts for changing population size over time and demographic distribution over time, it's actually not got more common. It's kind of pretty stable across the decades. Even when you go back to like Victorian era, it was, and beyond, and before that, there were cases. It probably wasn't diagnosed as much. Not as many people ever went to a doctor, or certainly not a psychiatrist. And people would assume you had some other medical problem that was making you underweight. They wouldn't assume, if you didn't say, that you were not eating enough for a psychological reason. So it's thought that since documentation of it became more common in, like, say at least, say starting from the 60s, it hasn't got more common. And bed, it's harder to know because it was documentation started, is very patchy, unfortunately, until more recent years. But no, I don't think there's any evidence that it's changed over time. And in other cultures, it's simply like it manifests in a different way. Like there was a study in one of the countries in Africa, I wish I could remember more detail, where they looked at girls who would fast for religious reasons, just like in medieval Europe. Medieval Europe, you'd have the fasting saints who would become very underweight, and they were canonized for it, for their dedication to the. And it's like, that's basically, and when there were diary entries from them describing literally the thought processes of someone with AN, in a way, like feeling really good despite not eating, and some of the neuroticism around not feeling guilty if they eat. It's like, this is basically the same condition, just they were hiding it in a different way. They were hiding it behind fasting, and people in Africa do that. They don't hide a bit behind as often. I'm sure some do, but there was a study showing that people in a different culture where there isn't TV to blame, there isn't magazines to blame, people aren't reading them or looking at them, they will blame, I'm just fasting religiously, So it's like, it doesn't suggest that society has anything to do with it. It suggests that people with these conditions want to, I don't want to say blame, they want to blame society because that it justifies in their minds to keep doing it, because it is a coping mechanism people don't want to let go. And they will tell themselves, well, society encourages this, because if society encourages it, it justifies them continuing to do it. It's helping to motivate them. Even if they don't want to keep doing the active behaviours, they do want to keep doing the obsessive thoughts. Like a lot of people who have physically recovered their weight and stay a healthy weight and don't over or undereat anymore, they still want to obsess in the mirror. They still want to obsess over the issue in an abstract way. They still want to get into fat acceptance, for example. They still do all the staring at themselves, staring at pictures of other people. They do all of that. They just don't do the eating part. And I do think that this encourages that. This encourages it when you tell people it's society's fault that you think this way. Yes, all the controversy over what's good to eat and what's bad to eat, it's annoying, but do you know what it leads to? It leads to confusion and frustration over what to eat and what not to eat. And it causes, yes, some people go on diets which turn out not to be healthy for them. But that's still not an E followed by letter D. It's not the same phenomenon. People being confused and getting conflicting information about what to eat and how is a healthy way to lose weight or maintain weight. that just causes confusion and people to go on diets that are not healthy. It doesn't cause a compulsive obsession. That has to come from within you.
Perfect body means.
And she
NHS
said what a perfect body means. I mean, that's something that people with E followed by letter D are obsessed with. Most people, what they want to look like comes up in their minds, but it's just not an obsession.
England says more support like the type offered here is being made available. Treatments include psychotherapy, counselling, sometimes medication.
It's not something you just snap out of. It's not something that goes away. It's an illness.
Simon's urging others to speak up and seek help. He fears he waited for too long. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
So there we go. Yeah, I don't think. I really don't think that. I really don't think that it's helpful at all to be telling people that this is society's fault, and I don't think it's helpful at all to be acting like um that as soon as someone goes on a diet and doesn't like how their body looks, that we have to call it atypical AN, because not liking how your body looks and going on extreme crash diets are part of BED. So please watch that video below to get the perspective of someone who's had the condition and has done the extreme reductive part himself, okay, and still doesn't think it was ever that same condition. I would say when you get to the point where you are already underweight and you're trying to lose more, it's definitely that, right? And you can make an argument that if you are, while you are on the way down from overweight, if you have it in your head that you desperately do want to get there, and then you get there, we could say it was that you had transferred at that point. But I just think most of the time you can't know. You can't know when this very rare thing has happened, this transfer, very rare kind of transfer, because I say the other way around is probably more common, just because Rex is much less common. Therefore, it makes more sense, I think, to wait until it's obvious, kind of, until we know, because most of the time, statistically, most of the time, it won't ever get that far. Most of the time, they will bounce around, and the harm they're doing to themselves is mostly coming from the overconsumption. And demonizing going on a WL weight reduction program, demonizing that and telling people that that's making them ill, I don't see how that's helpful at all. You just need to teach balance and nuance, and to say, you know what, you don't have to love what you look like, but you just don't have to be obsessed with it. Like, you can just say, you know what, it's not nice that I have this weird toe or a big nose or whatever, but I don't obsess over it. And in the same way, can I accept that I don't like something about my body shape and just not see it as the biggest thing in the world anymore, because you only sort of chose to do that to distract yourself from other things. It was a convenient thing to fixate on because it's linked to eating, and eating is such a pervasive thing. You're supposed to do it every single day, and except for the occasional fast maybe that can still be healthy, but you're supposed to eat mostly every day, okay? And so when you obsess over your size of your body, it means that you can also obsess over what you're eating. It means you can also obsess over how society views you for what you look like and for how much you're eating. And society judges me for eating this much or whatever. All of these things, you've chosen to obsess at one point, and you need to get out of the habit and choose to not obsess. Thanks, like and subscribe if you found this helpful, informative, anything like that.